next speaker was a professional pilot for over 18 years. He is now the CEO of Skyward, and he's going to come out and talk to us about drones over Portland. Let's hear it for Jonathan Evans, everyone. Thanks, Jonathan.
See you soon.
Yes.
Whoa, all right. All right, can you hear me? Yeah, it sounds like it. Great. Well, thanks for having me here today. This is blinding, but very cool to be up here. I think there are a bunch of you out there. I can hear you murmuring. It's wonderful. Yeah, my name is Jonathan. Wonderful introduction. I didn't even have to tell you I was a pilot, which is usually the first thing that any pilot does anytime he's in a room with anyone. Yeah, I've been a professional aviator for 18 years, and I am the CEO and one of the co-founders of Skyward. And Skyward is providing an integrated solution right now to commercial drone operators to give them access to the sky. And as a pilot, I'm extremely excited about this new era of aviation that we're ushering in right now. I feel like it's a lot like the internet, and I don't know, maybe half of us in here lived through the inception of the internet. I know I did. And at first, it seemed powerful and new and strange and real, and maybe for some people even a little bit scary. But we couldn't get a sense at all as we're getting our first AOL accounts how ubiquitous it would be, and how woven into our civilization it would be, right? But now my children and probably half of the people in this room have actually been born into, what do we call them now, digital natives, right? That the internet is completely woven into yourself now, your persona. And what I'm here to introduce you to today is the inflection point and the beginning of moving into a revolution in what I call an aero robotics network that's going to be as profound and as important as the internet. And I think what I want to help you see is the way that becomes the new normal for my kids, right? They're born into this time. We're at the inflection point. We're going to live through that revolution where these aero robots become interwoven to our urban environments. And anybody that's born today is going to wake up into a reality that looks a lot like the Jetsons and includes it already. So, what is the source of this aero robotics network? Well, I see it as a confluence of two major, beautiful rivers of technology. And the first river I want to talk to you about here is, of course, aviation itself. My first love in technology. We've got aviation on the one side here. I think my picture's back there, right? And on the other side, information technology, or networked information technology, is the other great river that's coming to a confluence here. And Portland, it turns out, is a hotbed for both of these rivers. It's been a major channel for both of them. And it turns out that in the aero robotics era, we're going to be the center of that as well because of that. We're sitting right at the confluence. And so there have been great adventures here from the beginning. Let's start with the aviation side. So there you are, June 1912, getting ready to go to the Rose Festival, right? And you see a flyer out there in Clackamas or whatever that really compels you to come all the way into the city and see it this year, because this crazy maniac up here decided to build his own airplane, 850 pounds. You maybe read about an aeroplane that's been flying maybe 8-9 years now. But this is the first one you've ever heard about in Portland. Absolutely. This is going to be something revolutionary. And I think that, 50,000 people come to watch this guy. 50,000 people in 1912. And I think that half of them probably came to see him fly, and another half maybe come to see him die. Either way, it was going to be exciting, right? This is going to be the first time anybody's ever seen a man take flight, or a woman for that matter, in our fair city. And sure enough, they all gather around, and what's going to happen? Well, our dear friend Silas, he does take off. He takes off of the roof of the Multnomah Hotel. Does anybody know where the Multnomah Hotel is today? It's the Embassy Suites, that's right. Off of the rooftop of the Embassy Suites between 3rd and 4th. They laid out a bunch of boards. You can see just there on the cusp there. They had a kind of a ramp, and you see some of the 50,000 watching this crazy guy. And he flew off of the roof there, and he mesmerized everybody. He flew over the river, and he landed in a field that could be the only thing considered an airport at the time. And so one question I'd ask you is, do you think he broke any rules that day? Probably not, right? Like, we didn't have any rules of the road. There was nobody else in the sky. There's nobody he could run into. So We didn't really need any. And, that's kind of the point, right, is that every technological innovation leads the regulation and the infrastructure that follows it, holds it, and puts it in a context that ultimately democratizes that technology. So sure enough, we eventually do get a few more Siluses up in the air, and they are flying around with each other. And by 1920, yeah, go ahead. It's wonderful. It is wonderful. This is the United States Army, and I think she might have mentioned it, but I will, since I didn't get to say I was a pilot. I flew for 9 years in the Army, was how I got started. I flew Blackhawks in the Army. So I'm proud to say that the Army is sort of the original government institution of aviation as well. And these are the first rules. These are the first rules of the road ever written, 1920. And more aircraft means that we have to have a social contract up there, right? We have to say which way is left, right, and center. What are the red, yellow, and green lights for navigating the sky? And one of the first ones that still holds true today, so you guys have already found a bunch of them, but, number 12. Number 12, man. This is the foundation of aviation and airspace management. This is what ATC is still doing up in the tower. This is what the captain is still doing in your 737. This is what I am still doing every time I am privileged enough to go rent a Cessna and fly around and not run into heavy metal up there. Now, it's fundamental. And a couple other things that come along with it is, if you can't see the other aircraft, maybe you ought to take out your regulation hanky, wipe off your goggles. And if you have trouble avoiding that other aircraft, maybe you ought to take your spurs off, cowboy. Oh, where's my spurs? There's my spurs, yeah. Take your spurs off, cowboy. Everybody knows pilots are a bunch of cowboys, but back then they had to make a rule against them wearing spurs, which I just think is great. So as more aircraft do join this aviation network, we needed more infrastructure to support them. We needed more rules, and we needed more infrastructure. And this guy, one of the great giants whose shoulders I think we stand on today at Skyward for sure, Charles Lindbergh, who inspired the public imagination in 1927 when he flew across the Atlantic. And he made us know that for the first time, this airplane was not going to be the providence of playboys and fools. It was going, and the Army, I'll throw them in there too. It was actually going to be woven into global commerce. And it was going to completely revolutionize that. And Lindbergh inspired that public imagination. And when he made his tour across the country in 1927, he came to our fair city to dedicate the first official airport that we had here at Swan Island. And at one point, it was the envy of the land. It was the most beautiful airport in the nation. But it wouldn't last. And Lindbergh actually lands here, and everybody's all excited. They waited to open the place for him. And he kind of kicks the tires on the airfield and says, this'll do for a little bit. He could see over the horizon. He could see that this really wasn't going to do for much longer. The runway was too short and too low, and the winds weren't favorable. All of these things. The infrastructure wasn't keeping up with the technology that he could see coming. And airplanes, pretty soon, we're going to have this crazy amount of 2 engines. And even have windshields. If you notice, the Spirit of St. Louis didn't have a windshield either. So, sure enough, 1940, they built the Portland-Columbia Super Airport. They issued a bond, and it was a big deal. This was like a really halcyon era of aviation. It was really frothy. People were really, really excited about this technology. And you can picture the mayor at the time getting people frothed up about it. We need a big old airport, and half of the people are probably like, oh, no, we don't need an airport. What's that for? But there we are, and you might recognize that spot, right? That's PDX. Yeah, the Portland-Columbia Super Airport is PDX. That mount up there is a little confusing because it's got a cone shape to it, but... So we built the first inklings of what we recognize today as aviation infrastructure. And this really is, this 1940, this is the era right after it, 40s, 50s, Pan Am, connecting the entire world again, truly democratizing this technology so that any one of us right now could get on our cell phones and we could order a plane ticket and hop on it and go anywhere in the world tonight. Anywhere at all. That's a revolution. That's an absolutely compelling thing to me. And this is also, for what it's worth, the most halcyon era of aviation for me. I have pictures of Pan Am posters in my office, just because I think this was the great romance that I fell in love with in aviation. And this era was kind of a high watermark for a while. This is sort of the accelerating technology of aviation arriving. And then, we add pressurization so we can get above the weather. And we add jet engines so we can get faster and safer. But basically, from the 50s forward, we've only incremented this technology. And you all live in the same infrastructure that they did back then. And yet we iterated through 3 airports in less than 2 decades at the beginning of this era. So here's what we have today. All of our little tributaries moving around the world to where we want form this amazing aviation river. And we all take it for granted now. I mean, go look up the Louis C.K. rant on this if you haven't. You should all be freaking amazed when you're sitting in an airplane. You should all be sitting there in a chair going, oh my God, 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 what a miracle this is. But we don't. This has become the new normal. This has become our normal. So let's look at a map of some of the contributing streams to the information technology side. So here is the foundations of the internet that we all live in today. In 1974, there was the ARPANET, and it came out of DARPANET, the military again. And you can see we connected a whole bunch of universities and research centers. We were able to do that, rather crudely between nodes that were really highly concentrated, stovepiped, and sort of reserved for the institutions of academic power and military power. But the next great revolution in this technology, the next great innovation, comes in democratizing the nodes, right? I keep forgetting that we have jokes up here. I'm trying to be serious. This is the Apple IIe, right? And this is the Oregon Trail, yes. And this gets distributed out to all of our homes and schools, right? And so for the first time, the technology becomes truly democratized. And we all have access to it, and now people don't think that computers are just for programmers anymore. We start to actually use them usefully in our society. And they're connected to this early ARPANET crudely, but as nodes grow, and we get more and more on a true network, we have to, again, build infrastructure, right? And in this case, we didn't start with a bunch of rules and regulations. In this case, we started to build technical standards, right? We started to say the rules of the road here, in a digital context, are about moving packets of information across these conduits in such a way that they uniquely know where they are and they will never crash into each other. They know each packet of information knows how to route itself around the other ones. The TCP/IP protocol is basically the rules of the road for the internet. And then some of this switch infrastructure, routing infrastructure, all of the Cat5e cables. The only geek cred I actually have in this circle is I spent some time as a network administrator in the Army, which is the least thankful job I think there is, possibly. I mean, because the only time you get called is when the internet doesn't work, and they don't call you on all the other days when it does, and you don't get to go show them these routers and switches and all of the protocols and say, hey, it's working, great. No, the internet just is always on. And the stage that we're at now, that we're all sitting here in, is that information has become completely mobile. And we all carry a personal computer in our pockets right now. And any single one of us could access any single other person on that conduit in the world right now, instantly. And you could also look up any recorded piece of information or analysis that's ever been written. That's profound. And Steve Jobs introduced this thing to us 8 years ago. 8 years ago. So the acceleration is very, very, very apparent to me. And again, the infrastructure here, it's fundamental. We put the picture up of the tower as well, right? Because it's not just that we have a radio in our hands that's connected as a personal computer to an information network. It's that we have a network of signals that a network of towers that can process all those signals and deconflict the routing of those signals and can, again, give us coverage ubiquitously, just about anywhere, and seamlessly. And we all now be like, I only have one bar, right? It's already become banal, right? It's already become so ordinary. We think we can, expect it. I think that's wonderful. I think that's great. And the other really cool thing about it is before we were all able to transmit and receive on these, the FCC regulated the bandwidth we're doing it on and said that the only way you can do that is if you have a ham radio operator's license, right? Well, I don't have a ham radio operator's license, I'll say. I bet very few of us do, and I'm sure some of you Snapchat without using Morse code. So that's a really neat, I think, regulatory innovation where we're able to collapse all of the rules of the road of navigating the bandwidth and offer it through services like our partners in Verizon that can collapse all of that into a digital commercial service that all of us now employ. And it leads us back to our point of confluence here. What is this point of confluence? Well, it looks like this. This is a renaissance for aviation in that aviation is becoming digital. And aircraft can now move as efficiently as packets of information in the sky without concern of running into each other. And it's also a renaissance for information networks because information networks are taking flight now. And these nodes can move in real time, in real space, and move things across real space. The Aero Robotics Network is really a bunch of flying cell phones. So what do the first nodes on the Aero Robotics Network look like? Let's get under the hood here a little bit. They're robust and miniaturized. Everything that we have in here, all of the technology, we now encase in a vehicle that can fly. This is a quadricopter. It's produced by DJI. They're producing somewhere between 1,500 to 2,000 of these machines a day right now. And they're shipping them across the world. This is the moment of the Apple IIe. This is the first node. And this is a $1,000 node. It's completely democratized. It's in any single one of your hands right now if you want to order it off of Amazon. And it's got GPS so it knows where it is in space. It's got LiPo batteries so that it can stay up for a while and you can plug it into a USB and charge it again. It's got onboard memory and processor and gyro-stabilized sensors and electronic speed controls to very precisely orient it in space, way better than I ever could with my dumb hands in a helicopter cockpit. And it's got accelerometers and it's got 4G connectivity so that the cockpit, the flight deck, is any portal to the internet. Any portal to the internet can move these nodes across space now. That's where the cockpit is. That's where the flight deck is. And that means autonomous flight. That means routing physical packets through the real world. So what can you do with it? Well, I put it into two big buckets. Really simple for you. These nodes can go around and they can collect bits. They're a 3D scanner for the real world. And this is where the market is today. I'm sure you've all read about these flying cameras now that have arrived so rapidly into our sky. And what they're doing for the most part right now is they're taking pictures. And they're using sensors to take more sophisticated pictures with things like hyperspectral cameras. And we can do precision agriculture with this. We can do industrial inspections, and we all know we have a ton of industrial inspections to do. We can do first responder work, animal conservation, and many, many more applications that we haven't even imagined yet. You know, the first thing that people figured out to do with the Apple IIe was actually index recipes. I don't think any of the designers of that thing thought that they're going to sell it so that people could collect their recipes. But it takes getting the tool in your hand to start inspiring the imagination of what's possible. The atom side is more interesting in my mind. This is where we can actually have the information networks reach out into the physical world and move things in space. And we all know that Jeff Bezos talked to us about this about a year and a half ago. And he mentioned that we're going to start delivering packages that are under 5 pounds within 30 minutes. And I think a lot of people scoffed, but that's a 9th generation vehicle that they're on there right now. We work very closely with Amazon. It's very real. The engineering is here. 5 pounds in 30 minutes can happen. So, what's holding it back? Well, if you're picking up on my thesis, you know that it's infrastructure. It's infrastructure. And that's where Skyward finally comes into the story. That's what we're working on here. That's what we're working on here with this amazing team that includes a bunch of honest geeks, great developers, coders, knowledge reasoners, brilliant people, and about 5 professional pilots in the team. So Skyward sits right at the nexus of these two rivers. And we are providing access to the sky for this swelling population of commercial drone operators that want to take these nodes and start to employ them as services to all of you. And there are thousands of them out there right now and rapidly accelerating. And what we do is we help them join this Aero Robotics Network. We basically take all of the, aviator expertise, I guess, and we And we collapse that into a digital service offering so that you, as a commercial drone pilot, don't have to have 18 years of experience in the cockpit to understand how to safely navigate the rules of the road in the airspace that is the public good we all trust. And we provide a real-time air chart. We provide a business management platform for these commercial operators. And we provide this team of experts that know how to navigate the rules of the road as they change. And we're a little over 25 now, I believe, and I think we have 3 dogs in this picture. They do amazing work, those dogs. And we're looking for more. So you can come visit us anytime. We are, well, let's see. Actually, that's where Silas was. There's the embassy suites right there. He took off from right there. And you can just follow his track to our office right there on NATO Parkway. And we'd be happy to have any of you come visit us. And I'd be happy to talk for more than however long 18 minutes, sorry I went over, about the Aero Robotics Network and this great revolution that we're all about to experience as a new normal. Thanks.
Thanks, Jonathan. You can have a seat. We have a few minutes for questions from the audience. Do we have mics out there? Our nice mic assistants? There they are. Anyone have a question? Okay.
How is Skyward addressing the issues of privacy? I know that it's shorter to cut through my backyard than it is to follow the streets, and I'm concerned about that.
Yeah. We're huge privacy advocates, I'll say, first of all. And I get invited to answer that question for state legislators and folks on Capitol Hill as well. It's clearly an important discussion right now. Anytime there's a new technological innovation like this, or like the internet, or like the wire itself, at the very beginning, I think there's also introduced a new social test of sorts that needs to be played out. And I think we're at the inflection point that starts those tests right now. So there isn't an answer to your question, but I think that there's an attitude and a social contract that's pretty well understood and established right now about what our sense of privacy, and always evolving, right? I think that when you look at the privacy issue and that social contract and how it works, how it juxtaposed with technology, we adjust a little bit differently. Look at what Google Earth does. They blur out license plates in Europe, but they don't in the United States. You have to make sure that you're listening to exactly where is that balance point right now in our sense of technology and privacy. And I think we're continuing to explore that. There is no hard, solid answer, but I'll tell you what I say to the legislators is, I'd appreciate if you all continue to legislate behavior and not the technology, because that social contract, the notion of whether you're spying on your neighbor, puts you outside of our system of laws, whether you use a drone to do it or whether you use a ladder to do it. You're still a pervert either way, right? So we understand that definition just fine. And the technology does not, I think, require us to scrutinize the choice to invade each other's privacy any further. And if there's anything that inspires that question to me, that more than drones, is it's the cell phones we're all holding in our pockets right now. They expose us to much more privacy concerns than anything Amazon's going to do with computer vision cameras moving from rooftop to rooftop to drop packages off. Fair? No.
Did that answer your question? No.
Yeah, it's an ongoing conversation. It is. What's that?
I get a benefit out of my cell phone.
You'll get a benefit out of this Aero Robotics Network too. You just can't see it yet. You will. We'll all use them within 10 years. You won't own one, but you'll definitely order from them. Absolutely.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Okay.
So we have this confluence of technologies that's very exciting. How do you view VR, 360-degree panoramic cameras, drones, open source information, all of this coming together? How excited are you, and how soon do you think this can be implemented within your business, within other businesses?
Oh man, that's great. Great question. I love those technologies that you mentioned as coming to confluence with with this one in particular. If you picture, so yeah, you can take a 360-degree camera right now. You can put it at the bottom of one of those drones that I showed you. And you can fly down the Willamette River and take a 360-degree view of it as it moves forward in space, right? And then you could put on a VR hood, and you could either do it in real time, or you could see the recording. I could actually picture like a whole new kind of tourism where I could sit you down in a chair, in a VR chair, and you could dial up a network of pilots all over the world that are going to take you on a tour of wherever you want to see. So if you want to just go fly through the Grand Canyon in VR, that technology is all coming together right now, and you can do that across a 4G network. I mean, there are all kinds of possibilities there, and we're just starting to play with it. If you look at the DJI M100, it's a developer drone that is very, very powerful. And one of the first things that I saw done with it is they married it up with an Oculus, and it was just a gyro-stabilized camera, not a 360 camera, but basically you have a pilot flying the drone, so he's moving it around in space, and then you as the observer, if you will, or the onboard sort of payload operator, could control the camera by moving your head around. So the drone takes off, it's holding the camera, and then I'm just the tourist on board, and I can move my head and cause the camera on the drone to move around. And that's neat, and and the Grand Canyon idea is probably the romantic version of it, but now picture somebody that needs to do bridge inspections all day long, right? Dull, dirty, dangerous work. And now we can give that person a tool in their kit where they can go and sit in their van in a VR scope, and they can send out an autonomous vehicle that knows exactly where it is in space and will never hit anything, and just direct what you want to see. And that's what I mean by you'll use it, is it'll become a tool like the PC, like the internet, where you don't have to reach for the uses anymore. It's just ubiquitous, and we use it in all factions of life.
Got a question up here?
You're not gonna get to any of yours? No?
So my question is, how do you deal with security with drones? Because I know that there are some people within the hacking community who have basically just dropped a box in a public place that sends out a Wi-Fi signal, and then the phones pick it up and send very valuable data to that Wi-Fi signal. And I saw that the drone has like 4G and different internet connectivity. So I guess my question is, how do you handle security?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So our CTO actually comes from a deep cybersecurity background, and he's built infrastructural level security systems for the federal government for most of his career. And so security is at the top of our mind. And I'm not as focused on the sort of the hacker scenario as I am about just the strength continuity and signal, integrity. More than anything, because that's ultimately what we certify to the same level that we all trust when we walk down a jetway, is that the engineering is so solid state that it's literally 10 to the minus 8. It's 8 nines of possibility at the tails of the bell curve of a fatality anytime you fly. And that's a bar none standard in transportation, right? If you compare that to ground transportation, it's orders and orders and orders of magnitude better. So in terms of security, I'm more concerned about that engineering first. If we start to see, early chinks in that armor, then I'm not saying to be reactive or anything. There are further steps you can take. You can secure that signal in any number of technologies. We don't seem to need to do that right now, and in fact, I think that would really slow down the velocity of the technology. But it's definitely on everybody's minds, and I think you'll see the developer community really come in there to provide some of the strength.
So let's say your devices are great, right? But there's lots of other flying devices, and many of them will be very suspicious. So how, legislation-wise, how do you deal with that?
That's a really good question. So we've dealt with non-participants, we call them in aviation, since the beginning, and they're birds, right? And I don't mean that glibly at all. We deal with non-participants in the airspace all the time, and in fact, it means that GE has to employ chicken cannons. YouTube that one, chicken cannon. It's freaking amazing if you haven't seen it. To certify the engines, that we trust when we fly them, because we have to be able to ingest large birds into those engines to reach 10 to the minus 8 as well. So yes, we're always going to have non-participants, and yes, in the drone era, as soon as you have a certified, verified, authenticated network in the light, you have automatically defined a black hat drone that isn't on that network, right? So I don't know where that goes. I'm slightly fascinated by it, to tell you the truth. There will be dark clouds of drones out there, and they will be doing, it's sort of like the Silk Road flying, right? You'll never completely get rid of that problem. You just have to know how to integrate with it and how to work around it. And like we do with birds right now in aviation, we avoid them, and then we also design the engineering so we can hit them, because we can't always avoid them. So I think that we'll look at similar solutions there, as inherently you have a sort of in the light white hat cloud of drones, and now we have to start dealing with the black hat. But it's not a problem yet. A lot of these things are very prescient, and these questions come from developer communities all the time, and they're right. These are the problems that we will need to be working on, but not right now. It's not the most pressing concern.
You've talked a lot about how you've been advising legislatures, or especially the Oregon one, and even then you have a very great and positive slant on the future of drones. And maybe that comes from some of your contracts coming from Amazon and using it in commerce. But I would ask you more about, where do you foresee the future of the drone being used? And you brought up the bad examples, and that was like from a public person to a public person being the pervert. And that's in public usage. But where do you see it going from more of like a real-time surveillance from the government, or policing, which is more of the bigger concern? Because the drones were developed out of like a military application, and you've talked about the amazing capacity of flight. And before, we were talking about robots being confined within cages, but yet the great thing about the drone, or about aviation in general, is that the robot is in the air, it doesn't face obstacles. So we were able to more rapidly develop it than we were more ground-based robots that could hurt people, like just by bumping into them, because there's nothing to bump into in the sky. But bringing the application out of a military sense abroad, bringing it here and making it a domestic thing, the big question is about public policing through either a variety of sensors that have an aerial view, like we're talking about policing that police were using thermal imaging to spot cannabis grows, because the cannabis would grow at a slightly higher temperature than other plants, and so police were able to spot and identify and do drug busts based on technology. And the standard for policing has always been based on what is ubiquitous or common technology to everyone. But as the drones are becoming ubiquitous and just everybody can have them, that's giving the excuse more to police to be able to use that technology for further policing, because detectors and everything are becoming. Where do you see, and where are...
Let's wrap this question up quickly.
Where are you concerned about the drone being used for public policing? Sorry.
Yeah, that's a very fair question. And the airplane came out of the military, the internet came out of the military. And that's where we incubate technology for the most part, whether you like it or not. I mean, the first things that we do with technology is we try to bomb each other, I guess. But
and make porn.
And then, what's that?
And make porn.
And make porn. And so, but when it does arrive to the sort of the bell curve, the common fold, the commercial society, the civilization we all live in, I actually have to say I've found that the police, in terms of, again, talking about behavior, not the technology necessarily, the police actually have the best respect for the Fourth Amendment of anybody I know in society, because they have a burden of proof. They're not allowed to violate it, or they won't be successful at their job. So when you see them actually dealing with this technology, they're the ones that are so cautious about exactly how they can employ it and what they're allowed to look at. And I think it's a great tool for them, and especially if you think about it, if you were missing your kid, and you want the police to have this sensor in the sky then. You don't think about it then as an Orwellian problem. You think about it as an amazing tool that the police can use. And I think that they're not the problems in terms of violating any of our social contract right now. They tend to get it, and they're held back by a lot more things than any of us are. The real question is really about how we employ it as a population.
Okay, controversial answer, but we have time for one very quick final question back there.
I'll actually ask a question real quick here. I see the benefits of trains every day. I just don't want one in my backyard. How do you see, is there going to be a highway system that'll be developed, and will this be stuck in poor communities like poor communities tend to be around airports?
That's a really good question. Yeah, so you look at the picture up here. I definitely see paths of optimization for sure. I think that what you'll see in the sky is a route pattern of sorts, but it won't be like a highway system that has hard and fast rules. I think that what you're looking at ultimately in aerial robotics network is a DHCP server for volumes of airspace, really, and that when a node on that network, when a drone requests a path, requests a volume of airspace, there will be many factors that determine whether that path is available to it or not, and you'll see certain paths of intelligence that are optimized paths. So like as a helicopter pilot, we didn't have like super hard and fast rules about flying down low below 500 feet, other than to not kill people, right? Don't run into people. And if you lose the engine, you have to be in a position that you wouldn't crash it onto somebody's head or house. And so what do? To meet that rule, you fly down the river, right? Because that's the path of optimization to meet that rule. And once you stack up a matrix of a dozen of those kinds of factors, then you will see paths of optimization, but they won't necessarily be hard and fast, cordoned off places. And I think that one of those concerns, I don't want a train yard near me, that is still going to be the conversation that we have. There's still, and you're going to get to have those conversations, and they'll play out as they do with whether that train track got in your backyard or not. It'll continue to play out that way, and I think we do things well in civilization. I think that we continue to increase our capabilities, and we do it more safely, and we do it more empowering, and we do it more democratized every single iteration. So I'm optimistic that the entire aviation safety system becomes much more sophisticated, much more profound, and our social contract with privacy gets better defined as we iterate through this technology. I think that those tests play out to civilization's advantage.
All right, thank you so much. Jonathan Evans, everybody. Thank you.